I'm a faculty member in the Institute of Environmental Sustainability at Loyola University Chicago, and I teach courses related to food systems, water, biodiversity conservation, and environmental justice.
Okay. So, what do you think is the cause of our major lack in resources? Like the major cause, if you could say.
I think that I think there's multiple causes for the dwindling natural resources that we have, but one of the major causes is our economic system and the way that we organize our systems of production and consumption. And that there's a lot of emphasis on consumption, so we consume way more than is really necessary for people to have good well-being.
Okay, so explain more when you say our economic system. You mean like our money sources and what we use our money for? Or do you mean the things that we tend to use unwisely?
I think the latter, the things we tend to use unwisely. So I think we, over time, since about the mid 20th century, we've increasingly emphasized materialism and consumerism. And I think that people just have way more stuff than most of us need. And at a certain point, you need food and clothing and shelter to be happy. But then you reach a point where you don't really need anything more. But we have created an economic system that's very much based upon consuming. And so I think that a cultural shift that changes that mindset would be a really important component in being more environmentally sustainable.
Okay. Do you think that environmentalism is only a wealthy as in developed countries or nations problem that only developed countries can fix? Or do you think developing and developed countries should fix this problem?
I think both developed and developing countries can fix this problem, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom within communities and people that live in developing countries. So in some cases, we can look to developing countries to see ways that people have been living in greater harmony with natural resources. I mean, I think there's problems and solutions that exist in both, in poor nations and rich nations. The types of actions that need to happen might differ, or the types of problems that people face might differ, but I think that everybody has to be involved.
Okay, so I noticed that at the Chicago River, I went there in what was that, seventh and eighth grade, and when I went there, it was like really ill. Like it wasn't a lot of diversity in plants nor animals. The water was very dirty. But from recent studies that I have been hearing, the water has changed. There's more diversity in plants and animals. What do you think is the cause of that?
So it's the result of people working really hard to improve the quality of that river. And so part of it are changes in policy. Some of the requirements, for example, are wastewater treatment plants and what types of, how clean does that water need to be when it exits the wastewater treatment plant. Those requirements have gotten increasingly strict, so that helps to improve water quality. But also groups like Friends of the Chicago River and the Department of Natural Resources in Illinois and other organizations have worked to reintroduce fish species. There are various organizations that work on habitat restoration up on the banks of the river.
Yeah.
So that helps to improve water quality by preventing erosion, for instance, and then thinking about development practices. So if people are building along the river, what are the ways to do that minimizes impacts on water quality, or where should development be occurring at? So I think it's because there's a lot of interest among various organizations and volunteers and citizens in the river, and people have worked really hard to make those improvements happen. And I think it's a inspiring. We hear a lot about environmental problems, so I think it's really
Yeah.
inspiring to hear, like, wait a minute, here's something that's getting better.
Yeah, okay. So when it comes to endangered species, what do you think is the major problem with them specifically from us humans? Like, do you think that it's the fact that we are killing them for their fur, that we're cutting down trees? Like, what do you think is the major thing with them? Because I love animals. And I know it's a lot of people out here that love animals.
Yeah.
So, for us to sit here and use all of their resources, what do you think is the major problem? Like, why?
Okay. So the key threats to biodiversity, one of them is habitat destruction and habitat fragmentation. So whether we're destroying habitat for agriculture or for mining or for residential development or commercial development, whatever. So just that they're losing their homes because we're taking it over. One of the key threats is climate change. So as the climate, as global warming occurs, some animals and plants can adapt. They'll sort of move and shift their range, but others won't be able to do so. One of the threats is invasive species. So we move a lot of plants and animals around the globe, and when some animals or plants are introduced in areas where they didn't previously live, they can really outcompete the native species and cause extinctions. Also, pollution is another key threat to biodiversity. So sort of those four factors are really the immediate forces that affect other plants and animals and their ability to survive. And then behind that, obviously, are things like the number of people on the planet, how much we consume, the types, the way we go about that. So sometimes we, like with habitat, for example, you can have, when you go out of Chicago, there's a lot of urban sprawl, takes up a lot of land. And, within the city, there's very dense development that takes up, many more people can live in much less space. So there's different ways that we can go about making sure that we have what we need, but also doing that in ways that are mindful of other species. But we often don't do that as well as we could.
Okay, so when it comes to greenhouse gases,
Yeah.
such as carbon monoxide, for example,
Carbon dioxide.
carbon dioxide. I'm sorry, carbon dioxide. Yeah. When it comes to carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases, how is that a problem for our environment? Because some people believe that all these water plants, and all this construction that we're doing, it puts it in the air, but sometimes depending on what it is, it's kind of helping the construction that's being done, and the work that's being done is helping it. But what it's putting out,
I'm not
like
sure
greenhouse gases.
I totally understand the question.
Okay, so let's say if I was doing construction.
Yeah.
And I was using like a drill or some kind of mechanical function that could actually harm the earth by putting more carbon in the air because it's using like gas or something.
Yeah.
In what way is it a good thing that I'm helping the earth but also harming the earth by putting carbon in the air?
Okay. So, well, a lot of the carbon dioxide that enters the air is from burning fossil fuels.
Right.
So coal and oil, natural gas. And that, from driving cars, from electricity, from industry. And so in the example of construction, it would depend upon, the carbon emitted might be related to the equipment that's used, the materials, the production of materials that are used, and so forth. So people might be able to approach that in different ways that would emit less carbon. I'm not sure. I mean, global warming across the board, there may be some species that would benefit. There'll be some species that maybe can expand their ranges. They'll do really well. But there are a lot of species that won't, that will have a more difficult time because of it. So I think you're right that it's not across the board going to have negative consequences in all places for all living things.
Right.
Those impacts vary. But we are seeing the consequences already in terms of extreme weather events and other impacts that do have negative outcomes for people. And so I think it's really important that we look at transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources.
And how do you think we can do that?
Um, I think in a couple of ways. I mean, one of them is through policies that would provide incentives towards renewable energy. So, for example, right now in Illinois, there's proposed legislation called the Illinois Clean Jobs Bill, and the idea behind that is
Right.
to invest in energy efficiency and renewable energy and create jobs in those industries for people here in the state. Um, but I also think consumers can, in the choices that people make, can choose for options that involve less carbon in the manufacturing of the items that we buy and so forth. And just in our lifestyle, how we choose to, whether we choose to drive or ride the bus or walk or ride a bike or so forth. So there's sort of those lifestyle changes, but then also it's really important that we have the policy changes and that people are advocating for political action on those issues.
Okay, so when you say policy, so I have an example. So let's say if you know how in certain oceans or something, or certain lakes, animals are being, what's the word? Not destroyed, but they're having to live off of eating plastic like turtles. Like turtles. This one turtle I saw on the news, I think it was, had the shell was deformed because of a plastic ring that got attached to it.
Yeah.
So, if we put up a policy about us not technically banning plastic, but not using as much plastic, what do you think would happen to like the homes that use plastic? So like let's say in my house, it wasn't like I used a lot of plastic in my house. Like I needed plastic for like my garbage bags and stuff like that. What do you think would be the effects on the homes?
I think, well, people would have to adapt to that and change some of their behaviors. And so in some cases, like with your garbage bag, you need to have something you can put it into. But in other cases, you like when people go to the store, maybe you buy one item, do you really need a plastic bag to carry that with you? So
No,
I
not
think,
really.
yeah, so I think it would, you people it would people would need to change their behavior, and some of those may be very simple changes, and others may or may not make sense.
Okay. Why do you believe environmental science is personally important to you?
Okay, that's a really good question.
Like, cause I know you said that you work with environmental justice, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
So when it comes to the environment's justice, why is it personally important to you? Like, what makes you work on this study?
Yeah. Well, so for me, I've always enjoyed. I mean, I enjoy spending time outdoors. I like animals, and so I've always cared about the environment. Um, with environmental justice, the idea behind environmental justice is that everybody has access to a clean environment, and I
Right.
think that's really important. And I think just in general, we can't survive without having a high quality environment.
Right.
And also, I think that other living organisms have a right to be as well. So I feel like there's sort of an ethical or moral obligation to care about the environment.
Okay. How can we environmentalists help challenge or change the nation's actions? Because in certain parts of our country, as you know, they're not doing anything to help our environment. They're technically hurting it by thinking they're helping it. So, what do you think we could do to challenge or change their actions to make everything positive for everyone, including animals, unknown species such as bacteria, and humans? What do you think that we can do to challenge or change their actions?
I think it's a good question, and I think a tough question to answer as well. But I think some of the things that we can do are, like talking with people, or letting people know this is something we care about in a way that's not preachy or like you should do this or you should do that, but kind of understanding Like if you're talking with somebody about environmental topics, sort of finding out what's important to them and where are the areas that things overlap. So, for example, people may be really interested, maybe they're more concerned about health,
Right.
maybe they're more concerned about job opportunities, or so looking for, well, where are the intersections? Because, having environmental protection and public health are really closely connected, and there's definitely opportunities for creating jobs through developing the green economy. So, like finding those intersections, I think, can be really important. I think demonstrating success stories. So people often think, well, they think there's these trade-offs, like, well, I'm gonna have to give up a lot if I want to protect the environment. But there are
Right.
actually lots of examples where people are doing things that are really positive, and it's benefiting the environment and it's benefiting them as well. So like with the Chicago River, volunteers who go out and help with habitat restoration, like they're giving up their time, but then they're making friends, they're getting to know other people, they're getting exercise. Like there's a lot of different benefits besides the fact that they're doing something positive for the environment. And then I think voting for politicians who support environmental protection. And so obviously, we can only vote for the ones in our places where we
Right.
live. But, trying to have a voice and make sure that people are aware that this is a really important issue.
Okay, so far I have talked to two environmentalists. I have called a sweep and greet. I did that Monday. I did a sweep and greet
What's a
in
sweep and
my
greet?
in my community.
Oh,
So a sweep and greet is basically when you get your community or a group of kids or group of adults and you guys go out and you clean up the block.
oh, cool.
So I did that around my house and I live in the Austin territory.
Yeah.
So with that being said, what do you think, what else can I do that I don't know what to do yet to help the environment? Like basically I'm saying I've done a lot, but I feel like I'm missing something to actually make a bigger change. So what can I do that I don't know of yet?
Um, boy, I think it's hard for me to answer that without knowing more about, like what your interests are and where you live and so forth
Yeah.
to identify other actions.
Okay, do you know where West Humboldt Park is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's my school area.
Okay.
Technically, we're supposed to be working around our school area,
Uh-huh.
but I did a sweep and greet by my house.
Yeah.
Just for the fun.
Yeah.
It wasn't for the project, it was just for fun because I noticed my block needed a little cleaning.
Yeah.
So,
So there could be various things. Like for example, one thing that's a really big problem in Chicago is flooding that results when we have these, we have like big storms that are happening and we're getting like more intense. So where we used to have like kind of rain scattered over time, we're getting like these more like kind of short intense storms, which is one
yeah.
of the impacts of climate change. And when that happens, the sewer system can get overflowed. And I don't know if you know any people who have had problems with flooding in their homes.
Yeah, my aunt had her basement flooded.
Yeah, so there's a really cool program through the Center for Neighborhood Technology, and so things can be done like planting and rain. So I don't know if that's the right, I don't know if that's the right thing of what you want to do, but it's an example of another type of project with rain. You would have to figure out like where's the water running off of in terms of water that's coming off of pavement or rooftops,
Right.
and you have to size it properly and design the garden. You plant it with plants that do well under dry conditions but also do well under a lot of wet conditions, and so they soak up when it rains, they help soak up the water, and that water is not going to the sewer system. So that's just one example, but I'm sure there's other possibilities. You could look at, I don't know, the school could have a waste audit done to figure out, like, are there ways to reduce waste? Are there ways to compost? You could investigate, like, what's the potential for, I don't know if, for renewable energy, like solar panels or something. I don't know if that's feasible or not, given the site characteristics and the financial costs and so forth. But I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of possibilities that you could explore depending upon your interests and depending upon what people think are really priorities in your neighborhood.